a humble prayer in their lotus feet, and our Guru, Anadimuktraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama and Leela Masi's lotus feet, to augment this assembly with their divinity and grace, and to enhance our knowledge and guide us towards them. Last week, the Satsang Sabha was very kind to bless me with a prayer to Lord Swaminarayan and his Anadimukta to shower their grace on me. It was extremely touching to be rewarded in this way. I was on mute after I finished talking, so probably my heartfelt and emotion-filled thank yous were not heard, so I'm sorry about that. I'm also taking this opportunity to request the Mukto in Satsang Sabha to continue showering their blessings on this humblest of the humblest servant of the Satsang. Our Satsang today might be a few minutes longer. I will do my best to stay within the time limit, but please forgive me if I run a few minutes over. Since today's Satsang is a topic in itself, it did not make sense to spread it over two Satsangs. So last week we looked at some scientific discoveries for stage 5 and 6 of hierarchy. This week we will talk about some dimensions as science knows today, and also talk in greater details about the dimensions mentioned in Hindu scriptures and Vachanamritam, and try to map them. The mapping is neither easy nor straightforward. In fact, it is mind-boggling. The reason primarily is fourfold. First, the dimensions relate not only to the physical world that we can perceive, but also to the subtle worlds or other dimensions or force fields or time-space continuums that we cannot perceive. Since these scriptures are created by those who can perceive these worlds as well as our world, they do not clearly delineate the shift from one to another. It makes it very difficult to grasp and relate. Secondly, universe, as we know now, is constantly expanding. Everything is moving away from one another. There is no clear measure available on the rate of expansion, but there is an agreement that the expansion is accelerating. So it's not only expanding, but the expansion is accelerating. So that is one unknown. Second unknown is that we do not know when these scriptures were created. So even if we knew the rate of acceleration, we will not be able to relate how much universe has expanded since the scriptures were created and fill in some gaps since we do not know the time. Thirdly, scriptures use yojan as unit of measurement. There is no clear agreement on this unit of distance measure, yojan. Most common agreement seems to be that 1 yojan is equal to 8 miles. That's the one that we will use today. However, the conversions vary from 4.2 miles to 10 miles as being equivalent to 1 yojan in different books and dictionaries. And the last one, some measurements are given with respect to Earth and some with respect to Sun. That is, some are geocentric and some are heliocentric. Since it is not clear which is used when, and measurements do not exactly match to what we know today, it is difficult to do one-to-one mapping. It is primarily due to these four that any concrete, accurate mapping is not possible. If Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama was visible to us in human form today, or if we could communicate with his divine form, we could probably ask him these things. Unfortunately, now we can talk to him only when he wants and only as much as he wants. So that makes it hard. And obviously I was not smart enough to get crystal clear clarifications when it was possible to communicate with him in human form. In fact, all the data and understanding of old scriptures, as well as knowledge of scientific advancements that is readily available today, was not so readily available then. So our questions to him were also limited. Nevertheless, let's make our best attempt to map things. Since the mapping to what we can perceive is not possible, today's satsang might seem a little fuzzy or confusing. One of the things that I have learned over the years is that when the finer details are fuzzy, it is better to encapsulate those fuzzy finer details in a higher level and the details of the higher level for clarity and fathomability. And that is what we will end up doing today. Now I know I just made up the word fathomability, it doesn't exist. So before we start, I wanted to clarify one more thing. The best available translation from Sanskrit to other languages for Srimad Bhagavat, wherein the creation and status quo are explained, that I have come across is by ISKCON group. I have been mentioning that during the course of our series. However, upon deeper study in last 1 week, I realized that explanation provided by Lord Swaminarayan makes more sense. ISKCON translation of Srimad Bhagavad says that the planets are almost evenly situated at 200,000 yojans or 160,000 miles. The measurements and the levels of planets and all do not map to a straight line, but they map to a curve. And that curve mapping is possible to get based on the mapping explained to us by Lord Swaminarayan in Bhugod Khagod or Geography Astronomy Vachnamritam. This Vachnamritam is a gist and essence of all the knowledge there is in Srimad Bhagavad with regards to creation. So we will base the rest of our satsang today on this Vachnamritam. With this background, let's move forward. We have been talking about the Trinity and Virat Purush and the 14 worlds created by Lord Brahma. So let's start with the 14 worlds. For those on WebEx, we have a picture that we used in the past of the 14 worlds: Satyalok, Taplok, Janlok, Maharlok, Swargalok, and Bhuvarlok are 6 worlds above Mrityulok. Atad, Vitad, Sutad, Tadatad, Mahatad, Rasatad, and Patad are 7 worlds below Mrityulok. And we live in these 14 worlds are in other dimensions that we cannot perceive. We can only perceive parts of Mrityulok. We cannot completely perceive Mrityulok either, though we live in it. So as I mentioned, we will start with encapsulation and move to the next slide and look at the 14 worlds and 8 veils or levels above it. In Gadada Pratham 46th Vachnamritam Rahasyarth, Sri Abji Baba Shri has explained these levels and their size in detail. The slide we see is a pictorial depiction of those details. Based on the description, each layer encapsulates the smaller layer in all directions. Therefore, there must be spherical layers. That's an assumption. Fair to assume, since most celestial objects are spherical in shape. The picture, therefore, is a cross-section of the veils or the layers. On the left-hand side, I have used the measurements mentioned in Vachnamritam. And on the right-hand side, I have converted them in US metric system in miles. I would also like to add that the depiction is not built to scale. So though the layers are drawn of same thickness, they are not same in measurement. The measurement of each layer is mentioned in its respective description. So the innermost layer of 48 crore yojan or 3.84 billion miles is where the 14 loks as well as the mountain Lokalok surrounding these 14 worlds resides. Surrounding this is a 1 crore yojan or 80 million miles of a covering of Earth. This, together with the inner Earth layer, makes it 50 crore yojan or 4 billion miles of innermost Earth layer. This Earth layer refers to the Earth in the 24 elements, not to the planet Earth. Encircling Earth is the layer of the element water, which is 5 arab or 5 abaj or 5 billion yojan or 40 billion miles in thickness. Enclosing the layer of water is the layer of element fire, which is 50 billion yojan or 400 billion miles in thickness. Each subsequent layer is 10 times thicker than the previous one, and the further list includes 4 trillion miles of wind element, 40 trillion miles of sky element, 400 trillion miles of ahankar, 4 quadrillion miles of mahatattva, 40 quadrillion miles each of numerous Pradhan Purush, stretching infinitely the veil of Mood Maya, surrounding the layer of Pradhan Purush, which includes many more infinite numbers of Pradhan Purush in its darkness. Sriji Maharaj has said that beyond this darkness of Maya is the divine brilliance. However, no one can see it unless one progresses on the spiritual path. It is impossible for science to go beyond the layer of Mood Maya. That is the limit of science. In fact, the limit of science can be tied to intellect of the 24 elements. Beyond that, it cannot be understood with intellect. And scientific understanding is tied primarily to intellect. So that's the limit of science. For longest time, I used to think that the layer of Pradhan Purush in Mood Maya, in the darkness of Mood Maya, is in dormant state, just like the unfertilized eggs. But later on, I realized that even those Pradhan Purush are active and alive. It is just that we cannot see them and cannot perceive them, and their worlds are completely shielded from ours. Other thing is, based on these measurements, the 14 worlds are very close by to our solar system. They are encapsulated in 4 billion miles or 5.96 light hours, or amount of distance light will travel in 5.96 hours. Planet Earth is 8.3 light minutes away from Sun. That's just to show relativity. The scriptures mention the other 14 loks to be around Sun. The extent of those other worlds, how far they stretch out, is not known. There is quite some mention about the size of many of these. However, it is very difficult to map it to what is visible to us. So we will encapsulate that ambiguity in the layer of 4 billion miles of Earth element. One interesting thing in Srimad Bhagavat is explanation of the size of the body of Virat Purush. The body is called Shishumar. It is not clear whether it refers to Virat Purush or Pradhan Purush, but let's map it to Virat Purush. It is said that the head of Shishumar is where the North Star is, and then goes on to explain various stars and constellations in the body of Shishumar, which means the body of Shishumar itself is the stars and clusters of stars that we see. The body itself is so big. A while ago, we had mentioned that the deities have a soul, a body, and an effect. This may not be true for all entities living in so many spiritual strata. For some, the body itself might be big enough as the effect, and the soul itself could have a definite embodied shape, a definite divine shape. There may not be the three distinctions, but only two. So the divinely embodied souls are the cause, and the body is the effect. Based on that description in Srimad Bhagavat, it seems the body of Virat Purush itself is very big and may have only the distinction of body and soul. It is not very difficult to comprehend this. Think of the size of our body when compared to the size of microbes or each cell in our body. We are huge compared to them. As we saw earlier in our series, there is a theory among scientists that universe is a huge living organism. So all in all, it could be that Virat Purusha's body is so big that it spans across the universe. Those interested can read further on Shishumar in Srimad Bhagavat, but let's stay focused on our satsang and move forward. On the next slide, what I've done is taken the measurements on the previous slide and converted them to the galactic measurements to try to draw some parallels. I know this is a little skewed and cluttered, but there was too much information that needed to be presented in that space of one slide, and the numbers were big, so I could not reduce the size of the columns, so that all in all made it difficult. So there are two tables on this slide. The first table has multiple columns, so let me walk through each of the columns. The first one is the category of the whale. The second column is the size of that category or whale in yojan, as is mentioned in the scriptures. Now, since it is spherical in shape, the thickness of each layer has to be counted twice in order to get an overall diameter. Diameter is twice the radius, so we have to count the thickness twice. That is what the third column is doing. The fourth column, cumulative diameter in yojan, adds up diameter for each layer to show how big that particular encapsulation looks. For example, within the diameter of 110.5 billion yojans is the encapsulation of the element stage and everything in it. The fifth column is conversion to miles, and sixth and seventh column are conversion to US counting system. Eighth column is size in light years, and ninth column is volume in cubic light years. The volume is determined using the formula of volume of a sphere, 4 by 3 times pi times r cube, where r is the radius, One might say that these may not be exact spheres, but could be oblong or elliptical in shape like our sun, our earth, etc. It may be so, but for the purposes of our simple understanding, it does not matter so much. So we'll stay with the simple volume calculation formula of the sphere. The second table on this slide is based on the data that is available to us from the scientific world. We have some measurements in miles and rest in light years. To recall, light travels at 186,000 miles per second. Light year is a distance traveled by light in 1 year, and it is approximately 5.878 trillion miles. Sun is less than 2,000ths of a light year from Earth. Diameter of solar system is 1.19 light years. Distance to nearest star is 4.24 light years. Diameter of Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years, and its thickness is 1,000 light years. The volume of Milky Way galaxy I have calculated using the formula for volume of a cylinder, pi r square h. H is 1000 and r is half of 100,000, which is 50,000, and pi is pi. So that is how the volume of Milky Way is calculated. Our nearest galaxy is 2 million light years away, and the largest known galaxy is 6 million light years across. The universe is estimated at 1.5 billion light years across, and there are 120 billion plus visible galaxies in the universe. So this is what we know scientifically. Now let's see if anything maps here. The measurements mentioned in our scriptures must pertain to our galaxy in our solar system. So dividing the volume of Milky Way galaxy by the encapsulation of Pradhan Purush at 15,120.7 light years diameter and its related spherical volume of 1.81 trillion light years cubed, which is the bottom right cell of the first table, we get a number of 4.33, which is the bottom right cell of the second table. This means that based on pure measurements, there will be 4.33 Pradhan Purush in a Milky Way. This number, together with the knowledge that universe is constantly expanding and that under one Pradhan Purush there must be many such encapsulations of subsequent layers, it is quite fair to assume that Milky Way equals Pradhan Purush. So at the level of encapsulation of Pradhan Purush, we can say that this strata maps to a galaxy, irrespective of the fuzziness of the mapping of the smaller layers. Now, how powerful the Pradhan Purush is probably determined by the size of the galaxy. We know through scientific discoveries that there are different types of galaxies. Some are in the process of forming, some have just about formed, and their black holes are devouring on their stars. Some have stabilized into spirals and that rotate around its center, and some are elliptical, some are large, some are small, and so on. Just like us human beings. Some are just born, some are growing, some have stabilized in middle age, some have grown old, some are large, some are slim, and so on. There also seems to be a power battle going on at that level. Galaxies also go through a power dance when they collide with each other. The larger galaxy eats the smaller ones, our own Milky Way galaxy is said to have eaten 25 smaller galaxies in the past, based on the star cluster formations. Maybe these clusters were Virat Purushas, maybe there were young Pradhan Purushas, who knows? But this is very similar to the power struggle going on within corporate world and between corporations. VP with more power takes away the team and power of other VP and keeps growing big. Larger companies buy smaller companies. We have a huge software giant in the valley who has managed to eat many small and large companies. At one point in time, it seemed like that will be the only surviving company in the valley. So, having mapped a galaxy to Pradhan Purush, the dark matter within a galaxy and closely surrounding the galaxy to keep it together can be mapped to Pradhan Prakruti or Pradhan Maya, and all the remaining darkness around galaxies can be mapped to Mood Maya. This mapping of measurements is possible only at the Pradhan Purush level. The lower level mappings are not within the reach of the limited knowledge we have today. So after doing this mapping of the veils above Mrityulok in which we live, let's try to go levels further down. As we saw earlier, Mrityulok is one of the 14 loks encapsulated in 0.48 billion miles thick layer of earth element. On this next slide, it's a depiction of Mrityulok as is described in the scriptures. With the same logic, since the larger layer encapsulates the layer beneath from all directions, it is assumed to be circular or spherical. The layer in turquoise represents the 7 seas or the 7 oceans, and the layers in red accent represent the 7 islands. Since providing the details of these and then converting them to miles and US metric system would have created too much clutter on the slide, I have only kept the measurements from the scriptures and provided the conversion rate and the footnote at the bottom, just to keep the slide clean. Secondly, just like the previous picture on 8 veils, this slide is not built to scale. In other words, all the layers are not equal in thickness shown in the depiction. So let's quickly walk through the Mrityulok. The innermost layer in the center is an island called Jambu Dweep. The word Dweep means island. So Jambu Island is 1 lakh yojan in diameter. It is surrounded by sea of salt water. This sea is also 1 lakh yojan in thickness. Surrounding this sea is the island Plaksh, which is 2 lakhs yojan. Residents of this island worship sun god. Surrounding Plaksh is the 2 lakh yojan thick layer of sea whose waters are like that of sugarcane juice. Surrounding that is the island Shalmali, where moon is worshipped, and it is 4 lakh yojan thick. It is surrounded by 4 lakh yojan thick sea whose water is like wine. Surrounding that is the 8 lakh yojan thick Kush Dweep, where fire is worshipped, and it is surrounded by 8 lakh yojan ghee-like sea. 16 lakh yojan thick Craunch Island surrounds this sea. Water is worshipped on this island, and it is surrounded by 16 lakh yojan white sea whose water is like milk. The next layer is of the island Shak, which is 32 lakh yojan thick, and wind god is worshipped here. It is surrounded by 32 lakh yojan yogurt-like sea. The last layer is that of 64 lakh yojan Pushkar Island, where lotus-born Lord Brahma is worshipped, and it is surrounded by 64 lakh yojan of sea whose water is like divine nectar or amrut. This slide captures what the scriptures say about Mrityulok. The scriptures also talk about location of other loks with respect to sun. However, they do not provide a whole lot of dimensions around those worlds, and even where they provide dimensions, it is hard to map because we cannot see those loks. So for those who are interested in knowing more about these other worlds, whatever information is available, it is there in Srimad Bhagavad, so you can read it further there. Other than the essence captured in Vajramritam, I would still say that ISKCON translation is the best that is available. And if somebody comes across something that's more authentic and better than that, please do let me know. So for our purposes, let's map a description of Mrityulok to the overall picture. The next slide has a table very similar to what we saw earlier. The columns have the same meaning as before, so I'll not explain the columns again. The key is to note here is this. The encapsulation of the final layer and the ocean, or in other words, the cumulative diameter measurement of all the layers together, is 0.4 billion miles, 0.4 billion miles. This is close to the distance of the planet Jupiter from Sun, which is at 484 million miles, or 0.484 billion miles. However, we know that universe is expanding continuously and must have expanded since the scriptures were written. So maybe Mrityulok represents the extent of the planets in the solar system. So it may now seem like Saturn and Neptune are far out, but maybe in some earlier state they were close by. So maybe Mrityulok can be mapped to solar system. Based on this mapping, the landmass of islands could be the planets and their orbits, and the seas or oceans could be the space in between the planets. It's speculation, but it makes some sense. There is, however, a problem with this mapping. And believe me, I've struggled with trying to bring some mapping, and I couldn't put it all together. And this is the problem I found with this particular mapping. The innermost Jambu Dweep or Jambu Island, which is 1 lakh yojan or 800,000 miles, talks about continents which are on Earth, as we'll see shortly. So this view of Mrityulok seems to be geocentric or centered around Earth, since Jambu Island is at the center rather than heliocentric or centered around Sun. So it brings us back to thinking if these islands and oceans are something around the Earth in a subtle world or other dimension that we cannot see, or is it something related to the planetary system, or maybe both, related to Sun's planetary system but centered around Earth. Irrespective of whether it is centered around Earth or Sun, and whether or not it is perceivable by us, one thing is clear, that the extent of Mrityulok is as large as Sun's planetary orbits. So ignoring the finer fuzziness, we can use this encapsulation for Mrityulok. The other interesting thing is size of Mrityulok versus size of the layer of element Earth. We saw earlier that the size of layer of Earth is 4 billion miles, The size of Mrityulok is only 1/10, that is 0.4 billion miles of that. This immediately reminds of the string theory, which talks about 7 additional dimensions and parallel worlds. Now we know there are 14 loks, so there are 14 parallel worlds, but I was just reminded of that. So coming back to the planetary system mapping to Mrityulok, there is just one more thought on that. On this next slide, we have 4 pictures. The top left is a bar graph of distance of planets from Sun in kilometers. I couldn't find one in miles, so I've used this. The top right shows a table with interplanetary distances. That's just for reference. These two are based on scientific data that is available today, and I have borrowed them from internet. The 2 bottom bar graphs are created based on the data that we saw on the earlier slide on Mrityulok, and I generated them in a spreadsheet. The bottom left shows individual diameter of each land-sea layer combined. So the first island and the first sea, the second island and the second sea, and so on. And the bottom right shows the cumulative diameter of each land-sea layer. The red line shows the curve or the increase, the path that this graph is taking. As you can see, it's not a straight line. It's a curve. And the curve on the top left, which is based on the real data, is a little wider than the curve at the bottom. That is because the universe is expanding, so the curve will keep getting flattened out by the day. The similar shape of the curve, however, tells us that there is some truth to the dimensions mentioned in the scriptures. If we had data around all the unknowns and could fill it in the calculations, we will be able to draw one-to-one mapping. Unfortunately, partial data only helps us in speculating theories rather than establishing truths. Okay, so that was about Mrityulok. Moving to the next scale, which is, so we talked about 7 islands on the Mrityulok, the centermost was Jambudvip. So coming to Jambudvip. The size of Jambudvip is said to be 1 lakh yojan or 800,000 miles in diameter. The diameter of planet Earth is 7,900 miles. So diameter of Jambudvip is 100 times larger than diameter of Earth. Moon is 238,000 miles away. So Jambudvip is larger than the orbit of Moon. So maybe Jambudvip relates to Earth's gravitational field or Earth's magnetosphere. Earth's magnetosphere on dark side extends up to 3.9 million miles. And on the sunny side, it extends up to 56,000 plus miles. So maybe Jambudvip refers to Earth's magnetosphere. The reason I'm mapping Jambudvip around Earth, as I mentioned earlier, is because Jambudvip is said to have continents, and they are described by north-south directions as we know them. Additionally, one continent maps directly to the Indian subcontinent and the South Asian tectonic plate, which is the Bharat Khand. We, however, once again hit the same problem. We cannot see and perceive anything and do not know where these things are. For example, we do not know where Meru mountain is. It is said to be made of gold and sitting at the center of continent Ilavarth. Ilavarth is said to be accessible only to deities. Some map Meru mountain to Mount Kailash in Himalayas. However, that does not make sense, since between Meru mountain and Bharat Khand there are 2 other continents. So if Mount Kailash was the Meru mountain, then Bharatkhand is right by Mount Kailash. So how do we explain those? The only way you could explain those was if Harivarsh Khand and the Kinpurush Khand, or the continents, are located in different dimensions that we cannot see. Otherwise, the mapping of Meru mountain to Kailash doesn't make sense. So mapping of Jambudweep to planet Earth is not intuitive. But let's quickly look at the continents as they are described in the scriptures. In the center is the 11th continent where Sankarshan or Tamas Ahankar is the god and Lord Shiv is the prime devotee. North of that are 3 continents. First is called Ramyak where Matsya Avatar is worshipped and Savarni Manu is the prime devotee. North of that is Hiranyamai where Kurma Avatar is worshipped and Aryama is the prime devotee. Northmost is Kuru where Vara manifestation of Lord Vishnu is worshipped and Earth is the prime devotee. On west of Ilavar is Ketumar or Subhag, where Pradyumna or Sattva Ahankar is worshipped by way of Lord Vishnu and Lakshmi ji is prime devotee. On east of Ilavar is Bhadrashva, where Haigriv is worshipped and Bhadrashva is the prime devotee. South of Ilavar are 3 continents. First is Harivarsh, where Nrsimha Avatar is worshipped by the prime devotee Prahlad. South from there is Kinpurush, where Lord Ram is worshipped with Hanumanji as prime devotee. And south of that is Bharat continent or Bharatkhand, where Lord Narnarayan is worshipped and Naradji is the prime devotee. Now, it is only this Bharatkhand or the Bharat continent that we are able to map to Indian subcontinent. It is not possible to map anything else. So there is a description of all the continents and the mountains and rivers on each of these continents in Srimad Bhagavad. So for those who are interested, you can read it. But we don't know which continent as of today does it map to. It's very hard to say. It's very hard to relate to it. But if somebody wants to do that research and come back to the satsang and share that knowledge, whatever they find out, I think that would be wonderful. So let's move forward. This Bharat continent maps to Indian subcontinent, as I mentioned. And Bharat continent is said to have 12.5 regions that are beneficial for spiritual endeavors and 13 regions that are difficult or hard for spiritual endeavors. So I've listed those with the present day mapping wherever possible. I'm not sure about mapping of Malav to Maharashtra. If anyone has any insights on that, please do share. Secondly, some map Pilpilam to Philippines, but I'm not sure about that since Philippines is nowhere close to India in the present day. But maybe it was connected in the past, so who knows. So I left it in there. And Barmalar and Swal are the 2 mappings that I was unable to map or find elsewhere. So it is said that the endeavors for spiritual progress can be made only in the favorable land and place. So the 12.5 good regions that are mentioned is where these endeavors can be done. So I want to add a little bit to that. While it is true what is mentioned in the scriptures that these 12.5 regions are the favorable ones for spiritual progress and spiritual progress is not possible elsewhere, the post-scripture truth is also that since Lord Swaminarayan and his Anadimukta came to earth, entire earth became favorable, especially when Anadimukta like Anadimukta Parampuja Narayan Mama visited other continents. They all became equally favorable. So any place on earth that gives the convenience to meditate and live a peaceful and pious life is a favorable place. Now, it might still be that there are more people believing in the same philosophy, or more like-minded people in those 12.5 favorable regions, but it's not like other regions. You cannot achieve spiritual progress. So that was Bharat Khand. We start from Bharat Khand or any other Khand or continent that we live in. We go one level up. There is Jambu Dweep or Jambu Island. We go one level up, and there are 7 islands and 7 seas of Mrityulok. We go one level up. We have 14 loks. We go one level up, and we have 8 vales all the way up to Mormaya. So we have built that whole physical hierarchy as is mentioned in the scriptures. We have tried to map it wherever possible to the world that we can perceive, but the mapping has not been easy due to the 4 reasons that I mentioned earlier. So having talked so much about space and dimensions, let's talk a little bit about time. And talking about time, in interest of time, we will not go into much details, but want to mention that the time measurements in Hindu scriptures range from fractions of a second to billions of years. A lot of information is available on net. I have included links for past couple of weeks, as well as Lord Swaminarayan has mentioned these in Bhugod Khagod Vachanamritam. So on this next slide, we have again 2 tables. The second table feeds into the first table. So we'll look at the second table first. On the second table, we have mentioned 4 yugas and duration of each yuga, as well as the total of the cycle of 4 yugas, which then feeds into the first table, the first row of the first table. The second table also shows the human lifespan in each yuga. As is shown in the table, the second table, Kali Yuga is 432,000 years. Dwapar Yuga is additional 432,000, which is 864,000 years. Treta is another 432,000 on Dwapar, which means it's 1.296 million years. And Satyuga is another 432,000, coming to 1.728 million years, with a total 4.32 million years cycle for all 4 yugas, one cycle. And this total, as I mentioned, forms the first row of the first table. The second table also shows the length of the day of Trinity and the length of the day of 1 day and night of Trinity. That also feeds into the calculations in the first table. So let's go to the first table. Everything created by Lord Brahma, Prajapatis, Rishis, deities, Manus, which are at a level higher than human, have a lifespan of 308.57 million human years. Within 1 day of Trinity, there are 1,000 cycles of 4 yugas and 14 lifespans of deities, Prajapatis, etc. Last week we had talked about Lord Swaminarayan getting rid of half Kali Yuga, which means that out of the 432,000 years of Kali Yuga, 216,000 years of Kali Yuga have passed. Also, it is said that Kali Yuga started when incident of Draupadi's Chirharan in Mahabharata happened. Historians estimate Mahabharata to have occurred about 5 to 10,000 years ago. So about 221 to 226,000 years of Kali Yuga or this present cycle have passed. Now going one level up, life of Trinity as well as Virat Purush is mentioned as Dviparaj. Also, we saw a couple of weeks ago that Mahatattva and Ahankar and 24 elements all merge back with Pradhan Purush at the end of life of Virat Purush. So their lifespan can also be said to be Dviparad, just like Virat Purush. Since one day and night of Trinity is 8.64 billion human years, 30 such days make a month, 12 such months make a year, and they live for 100 such years. Their lifespan comes out to be 311.04 trillion human years. In their entire lifespan, there are 504,000 lifespans of deities, prajapatis, etc. Now, 311.04 trillion years means a day of Pradhan Purush. So, day and night of Pradhan Purush will be 622.08 trillion years. 30 such days make a month, 12 months make a year, 100 years make a lifetime of Pradhan Purush, which comes to 22.39 quintillion years. Lord Swaminarayan says in the Bhugod Khagod Vachanamritam that it is once in a lifetime of Pradhan Purush. That is once in 22.39 quintillion years that the soul is able to get birth as a human being. During that birth, if the soul aspires for and does endeavors for liberation, then he starts walking on the path of liberation and gets liberated. Otherwise, the soul goes back into the cycle of birth, death, rebirth in various life forms in the universe, and it takes forever to get a human birth again. Even upon getting a human birth, some lose it in following pretense gurus, some lose it in following worldly pleasures and whatnot. Now think about it. With every level that we climb up, there are greater powers, and with them are greater lifespans and greater bindings, as we talked about a couple of weeks back. Now, those mukta who explained all this to us about the greatness of all these levels that we have now come to trust based on all the other correlations, those same mukta are telling us that there is higher happiness out there. There is greater bliss out there. The Murti of the Lord is the paramount bliss. Do we want to just lose it all in speculation and doubt about small things, or we want to build that faith and get done with Maya and its bindings for once and for all? Do we want to be bound by what others believe in the world, or believe in this clear knowledge and get above all that is virtue and illusion created by Maya? Do we want to keep looking at what happened after Big Bang, or we want to know what is the source of the energy of Big Bang and what is beyond that source? Anadimutraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama has blessed us all for that achievement. But we have to make some endeavors. Let's all pledge today to meditate on the form of God that we like every single day, even if it is for 5 minutes. If one finds meditation difficult, let's start small and humble. Take baby steps. As Anadimutraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama used to say, remember the form of God for 5 seconds before starting any activity during the day. We can at least do that much for the one who has freed us from the continuous tossing around from one body to another, one responsibility to another, one binding to another, one lifespan to another. Who knows how long we have been stuck in all this? Don't we just feel like breaking out of all this and becoming free? Even the count of lifespan of higher levels makes me depressed. Doing the same thing over and over again for zillions of years. I'm surprised we have not aspired to become free of all that before. But we have now. And that is what is important. Let's all liberate ourselves by following the path shown to us by our Guru, Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama and Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Leela Masi. So today our satsang went a little over time, so thank you everyone for the patience. Next week we will talk about stages 2, 3 and 4 of hierarchy. The week after next we will look into theory of creation and destruction, both from perspective of scripture and perspective of science. The week after that will probably be our last satsang in this series, which we will spend with Sriji Maharaj and his Mukta. Sajanand Swami Maharaj Ni Jai, and a humble prayer to him and Sri Abji Bapa Shri for Sabani Maya Nokshay, or prayer to diminish the power of Maya on this Sabha. Thank you to the Satsang Sabha for opportunity to render my services, and please be kind to overlook any shortcomings. Jai Swaminarayan. Parag Bhai, over to you.
हाँ जय स्वामीनारायण બધા અનમ્યુટ કરું છું કોઈને કઈ પ્રશ્ન હોય તો પૂછી શકે હા એટલે કોઈને કઈ પ્રશ્ન હોય તો પૂછી શકો છો
ના જય સ્વામિનારાયણ પૂંજાબેને બહુ સરસ જે આપ્યું છે લેક્ચર અને બહુ સરસ હતું